Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so we'll be getting started in a couple of minutes. I can see lots of people joining us now. But before we get started, I'm going to ask you all to turn your camera on and give me a wave, because normally I don't get to see people's faces. And I know there's some familiar faces here. Jorge! So Jorge was my PhD student who left me last year, so nice to see you. Luciano, there's lots of Aston people here. Hi, Scott.
If you're unable, sorry, Katie, if you're unable to turn on your video, please let me know. I might have disabled it, so yes, just talk in the chat.
Yeah, Sonia wasn't expecting this. I just thought it would be nice to see your faces because we don't get to meet up in person as much as we used to. So welcome everyone. So now I'm going to ask you to turn yourself off, turn your mics off, and I'd like to say welcome to everyone. Welcome for joining us today at the very first webinar of our new webinar series. So we are CRES, which stands for the Society of Circular, Regenerative and Sustainable Systems. So it's all about circular economy. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction about who we are before we introduce the amazing group of researchers that we've got here today. So a little bit about CRES before we start. So let me just see if this will work now. Probably won't, knowing my luck. Here we go, next slide. Right. So this is who we are. This is the motley crew of people who put together CRES. And this person here, he's the one that started it all. So this is Coxiu. He's a researcher at Oxford University. And what he's done is brought together all of these people from all over the world, and we've met each other and come to know each other and work together through all sorts of different events. And one of the reasons why we wanted to put together the society was because we really like working together, and it's a great group of people, and we thought we could do something to try and tackle some of the challenges that we're seeing around the circular economy. So we've got people from all over. We've got people from Brazil, Mexico, Malaysia, all over the UK, all over Europe. So it's a really international group of people, and it's great fun to work with them. So our motivation for creating this society was about solving those complex global issues. We really wanted to bring together all of those really clever people that we know we will work with and look at it from a systems point of view. So we wanted to really improve interaction among stakeholders because we wanted to think about how we can initiate those conversations. So maybe through events like this, or if you have any other ideas about how we can improve communication between people that are researching in these areas, that would be really great. And about continuity of efforts. So we all know as research projects, they normally last for 3 years, but then what happens afterwards? So how do we make sure that we have really long-term impacts, long-term longevity in our impact on improving the world? So that was our main motivation, and this is the vision. We had our first session, our first get-together. The official launch of CRES happened February last year, which seems like about 300 years ago, before the world went mad. We had a great launch event with lots of people, and our vision came out of that. So we wanted to really create a supporting environment to bring together people from all sorts of disciplines. So social scientists, engineers, biologists, you name it, we want to bring you all together to promote the development and implementation of innovative ideas that can help move the circular economy forward. And so our mission is to bring together academics, industry, government, society, you name it, to bring all these people together, get them all communicating, to integrate systems thinking into everyday decision making. And by systems thinking, we're thinking about not just the little small niche of research that you're interested in, but how is that going to impact all the other wider things? How will we embed that into society? How will that fit in? And how can we make that work? So the whole idea about CRES is about rethinking systems. So if you're interested in getting involved in what we're up to, then the link there on the bottom left-hand side, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, and we've also got a website that you can go and have a little look at. But if you'd like to get involved, then feel free to contact any of us. I haven't actually said who I am. That's bad form. So I'm Katie Chong. I work at Aston University and EBRI, which is the Energy and Bioproducts Research Institute. I'm a chemical engineer, and my interest is in looking at the techno-economic evaluation of biorefinery systems. So yeah, feel free to get in contact with anyone from CRES. We're all very friendly, so yes, get involved. Today's session then, we've got an amazing group of all female researchers, which is fantastic. And we're looking at energy resilience in Nepal. So this group of researchers, they've just recently published this piece of work about this topic, and they're going to talk us through the story of that particular piece of work. So we've got people from Birmingham and Loughborough. I've probably missed one out. So we're going to start with Longseng too, who will do the introduction and background. Louise, who will talk us through the methodology. Xingfang, who will talk us through the results. And then Asha will talk about the current work and how they're moving the project forward. So as we're going through the presentation, please post your questions in the chat. We'll be having a nice discussion at the end, so I'll pose all of those questions to our researchers. Mics and cameras off now, please. And I'm going to now hand over to our first speaker, who is Longseng. So.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Longseng To. I'm based at Loughborough University in the UK. I'm an Engineering for Development Research Fellow, and I'm very pleased to be one of first of 4 speakers today to talk to you about energy resilience in Nepal and this whole systems perspective, but how to also include people in building up that picture of what that looks like. But because we're talking about Nepal today, I just wanted to send out our good wishes to our colleagues, our friends and family who are in Nepal right now, who are coping with the COVID-19 pandemic, because we are really talking about resilience, and I wanted to acknowledge that. Next slide, please. So by way of background, we have just submitted a paper, so unfortunately not quite published yet, but we have just submitted a paper around the work that we're going to present today. It's part of a project on the long-term institutional change in the wake of crisis, and looking at how that energy resilience picture happened in Nepal. It was initially to look at the situation after the earthquake in 2015. And that piece of work is led by Xingfang. And so she, Louise, and I went there a few years ago to conduct the fieldwork. And that was funded by the Institute for Global Innovation at Birmingham University and the Royal Academy of Engineering through their support of my research fellowship. So thank you. Next one. Yeah. This has already been introduced today, the structure of our talk, where I'll talk about about energy resilience as a concept and also the energy landscape in Nepal. And then Louise will talk about the participatory causal loop mapping exercise that we did. And then Xingfang will talk you through some of the outcomes of that. And finally, Asha will talk about our current research, which is more about the governance of energy resilience in Nepal. Next slide, please. So resilience itself comes from a Latin root which means to bounce back. And you may have heard the terms, bounce back better in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic that we have been going through. So, resilience is really quite a broad and fuzzy term. It can be about the outcome, we will achieve resilience, or it can be about process. So, a continual process of adjustment as resilience. Resilience is really about identifying strengths, capacity, elasticity, and has a sense of evolution as well. It's really good for using to understand the complexity in a system. But because of the fuzzy nature of the definitions, it's quite difficult to measure and to operationalize as well. And so all of that applies when we're talking about energy resilience. So looking at the energy system as a whole, it's also a really highly complex system. And so resilience is quite an appropriate rubric to use for this. In the past, energy resilience has focused a lot on physical infrastructure, but part of the argument that we want to make today is that we really need to transition to recognizing a range of interdependent factors that relate to energy resilience. Next slide, please. So just wanted to introduce you a little bit about Nepal's energy situation. It is a lower income country in South Asia. It's bordered by India and China. There's some really beautiful landscapes, the Himalayas, but this also means that there's some quite remote areas where it's quite challenging to deliver energy services. Nepal has made excellent progress in electricity access in recent years, but like many countries, the access to clean cooking remains a challenge. So in terms of renewable energy, they also have quite a high percentage of renewable energy in their energy use, but that is quite dependent on large hydro on-grid systems. But they also have quite a range of smaller renewable energy systems in more rural areas, which are not connected to the grid. So Nepal has been very successful in their programs in terms of smaller hydro systems, solar home systems, and improved cook stoves as well. So next slide, please. So in 2015, Nepal experienced a series of devastating earthquakes and aftershocks. It took the lives of 9,000 people and destroyed 500,000 homes. The assessment of the disaster needs at the time did include the energy sector. And it found that the earthquake damaged about 14% of the hydro power generation, and it delayed the construction of new hydropower projects as well. In terms of the grid, it did damage some of the transmission lines and substations. So that's the poles and wires aspects of the energy system, but power was restored quite quickly in the more urban areas. Away from the grid, so in the off-grid space, many households in those more rural areas affected by the earthquake were relying on those smaller renewable energy systems that I was talking about earlier, which were damaged. But a pilot study conducted in 4 earthquake-affected districts, we found that communities were able to leverage local technical expertise, resources, and informal networks to restore their own energy services. So this highlighted to me that we needed to develop a shared understanding of energy resilience to enable informal networks like that to function and to have a coordinated approach. Now over to Louise.
Hi, thank you, Longseng, and thank you, CRES, for the invitation today. It's great to be here. So in thinking about what Longseng's introduced there around some of the issues that Nepal is experiencing and thinking about this broader conception of resilience, here we take a whole systems approach to understanding the issue. And again, whole systems is a concept that means different things to different people and is hard to pin down as well. But really for us, what this meant is just that resilience consists of a complex web of interdependent factors, be they social, economic, political, infrastructural, that all interrelate and interdepend on each other. And so in thinking about how we can improve energy resilience, we need to identify these issues in order to create a more robust policy response. So I come at this, so our team is very interdisciplinary. I come from a political science background. And so thinking about the need for a whole systems approach really for me is thinking about, if we don't have a whole systems approach, what might some of the implications be? And I particularly think about this in terms of implications for policy and action and intervention. So if we take a kind of siloed or sort of look at only one part of the system in thinking about resilience, we might undermine very well-meaning interventions that we want to make to improve on energy resilience, because we've not recognized some of those underlying issues that might actually be of influence on the system. So for example, if we decide that a way to improve energy resilience is to create or improve a particular piece of infrastructure, if we don't understand how that infrastructure will be used and different sort of social dimensions related to that, either the infrastructure might not be successful or not as successful as it could be had we understood its interconnections with different parts of the system. Also, if we don't take this kind of whole systems approach, it might reinforce existing vulnerabilities in the system. We might be focusing on, say, an infrastructure intervention, thinking that infrastructure is all that matters, when actually there are some more social factors around that might influence instead, or be just as important. And so we're not tackling, we're not taking a multi-pronged approach to helping with resilience. And also, in not taking a whole systems approach, what we risk doing is kind of reinforcing path dependency, so recreating the problems of the past and sort of making history repeat itself. So a whole systems approach to me is about a process of scoping out and identifying the range of different influences on a particular issue, in this case energy resilience, and thinking about what that means from a policy perspective, a holistic policy perspective. Next slide, please. So in our project, we took a participatory causal loop mapping approach method, and that allowed us to create a visual representation of how stakeholders understood the issue of energy resilience. So causal loop mapping processes are used in lots of different ways. They can be used as visualizations. They can also be used as simulations in a more quantitative way, thinking about stocks and flows within systems. We've used this very much in a qualitative way, with the intention of identifying key variables and factors that stakeholders understood to contribute to or influence energy resilience in Nepal. So we use this process as a way of identifying not only the factors that stakeholders understand as influencing energy resilience, but also the relationships between those factors and whether they had a positive or negative influence on energy resilience. And really fundamentally here, we are focusing on stakeholder opinion, rather than what academics or experts on paper might think is the approach that we should take. Here we're focused very much on understandings of stakeholders. So in our approach, we had 18 stakeholders. So these were energy policy officers at different levels of governance, municipality, national, from delivery organizations in the public and the private sector, NGOs, and experts, including academics in that mix. Next slide, please. So the benefits for us of taking this kind of very explicitly participatory approach is that it can identify gaps in current policy. So it allows us to unpack the problem, as I introduced in the first slide. In thinking about the relationships between factors, it can also help us identify leverage points for policy intervention, places where we think actually, if we looked at this issue over here on the map and its intersections with other factors, there might be an opportunity for us to have some really successful intervention that we might not have thought about before had we not done this exercise. And specifically around that participatory component, it actually helps the participants, as well as us as researchers, facilitate learning on what energy resilience is and means through debate, and in particular, better understand each other's views and ways we can collaborate and work together to advance understanding around energy resilience and the kinds of approaches, be they policy or infrastructural or something else, to improve the energy system. Next slide, please. So what did we do then? What was our actual process? Well, to start off with, we had a workshop convened with these 18 stakeholders in Nepal. We started with a facilitated discussion around what we actually mean by resilience and energy resilience. So one of the things we were thinking about here is we didn't want to sort of go into this process mapping approach cold, if you like, not having got familiar with this quite academic concept sometimes of what resilience means. So we weren't aiming to provide a definition of resilience that everyone could agree upon. We were just trying to sort of understand and explore a little bit what we kind of meant by this idea of resilience. So one of the definitions that Longseng introduced the group to was the Red Cross's definition of resilience, which is the ability of individuals, communities, organisations or countries exposed to disasters, crises and underlying vulnerabilities to anticipate, prepare for, reduce the impact of, cope with and recover from the effect of shocks and stresses without compromising long-term prospects. So we kind of had a conversation around resilience first and foremost. We then asked the individuals involved in the workshop to identify factors that they thought might influence energy resilience and kind of write each one of those factors on a post-it and add them to the table in the middle of the room and just brainstorm, put all those ideas down. And then we took it in turns to each pick up one of the post-its, the sticky notes, to have the person who put the idea on the table to explain why they thought it was relevant, and then to start to discuss the relationships between these factors. So for example, if someone had picked up and made the point that research and development is important for energy resilience, and someone else had picked up innovation, to then think, okay, these two things relate to one another. Do they relate to each other positively or negatively in terms of improving resilience, for example? And then we would draw the relationship between the two factors and put a plus if we thought it would have a positive relationship, a positive impact on energy resilience, and a minus if we thought it would be to the detriment of energy resilience in Nepal. And then what we would do is through conversation, if it was that we thought other factors might work as sort of influences between those two factors, we would add in more. And then what we ended up with was a very messy table of post-its. We had a conversation about those and we created this big map of different factors and the relationships between them that influence energy resilience in Nepal from a stakeholder perspective. We then used that data effectively and converted the factors using Vensim software to then create a neat map of the factors. Next slide, please. So in the workshop, we ended up with these, a very messy but colourful map of the different factors and the relationships between them. Incidentally, the colours of the post-its don't mean anything in particular. It was just who had what. So we had this messy map that created a very rich conversation. And then next slide, please. We converted that through Vensim software to create a neater visual map of the factors that we could then use to sort of try and pull out from this what factors were influential to people. And here I'll hand over to Xinfang.
Hi everyone, and thanks Louise, and thanks to Longseng and Katie as well for introducing. So from now I will follow on what Louise has said and to go through some of the findings and results from our analysis. As Louise just said, so we use this software to relocate the factors and links and try to categorize them. As you can see, those factors, they roughly can be categorized into 4 different categories, which are governance factors, social factors, economic factors, and technology factors. So here, as Louise has said, we want to capture all the factors and causal links that are identified by the workshop stakeholders that represent their understanding of energy resilience. So we kept all the factors and links that has been identified during the workshop. And it is possible that some of the factors or links might be missing or debatable, but we decided to keep all of them to better reflect what the participants' understanding is of the energy resilience issues in Nepal. So next slide, please. Just to give you some example of what are the causal loops that included in this map. There are more than 100 of them as identified by the software. But if we look at the example I've highlighted in the red color, so we start from this public-private partnership, which is a factor in governance category. And then there are many different causal loops in relation to it. So from the social factors perspective, you can see that the public-private partnership could enhance public participation, which would then lead to better public-private partnership as a result. As you can see, there are lots of plus and minus signs by the causal links, which implicate its positive or negative influence, respectively. And then if we look at economic factor, you can also see that the public-private partnership could attract more finance, and then more finance could enhance better public-private partnership as well. And then if we move on to the technology factors category, you can see that the public-private partnership could motivate more R&D. So whether it's research and development from the industry sector or the research and the academic sector. And then more and better R&D could then enhance the public-private partnership as a result as well. So you can see there are lots of positive and re-enhancing loops within this big map that indicate how the different factors and links are linked to each other. In addition to all those causal loops in this map, you can also see that some of the factors identified in the map have more links in relation to them than other factors. So next slide, please. Here I listed all the factors we identified with more than 5 causal links related to them, which indicates the level of importance of these factors in the energy resilience agenda in Nepal, according to the workshop participants' opinion. So in the governance category, you can see the most important ones are political leadership and private-public partnership. Under technology category, those important factors are infrastructure, reliability of energy supply, research development, energy security, and technology innovation. Then moving on to economic category, the most important factors are business, economic growth, smart tariff scheme, private sector investment, and finance. And from social perspective, the most important ones are consumer behavior, the adoption of new technology, and also public participation. So if we look at the very first one, political leadership as an example, Next slides, please. You can see that I've colored it in red, which are all the causal links around political leadership. So you can see there are 10 causal links related to it. So if we start from the, again, governance category, you can see that political leadership can be benefited from a more integrated policy, more strengthened domestic political agenda, and better vision, and also a more clear line of responsibility across different level of governance. Then if we look at the factors related from technology category, you can see that the political leadership could also be strengthened by better energy security. And then if we move on to the economic factors, you can see the economic growth could also enhance the political leadership. And likewise, in the social category, the political leadership could be enhanced through more public participation. And then there are two other causal links that are pointed from political leadership, which are towards, one of them is good governance, and the other is energy security and their technology factor, which means that if we have more strengthened political leadership, it could promote towards better governance and also enhanced energy security. Next slides, please. So just to summarize some of the key message that from our workshop and data analysis, what we want to highlight is that through this bottom-up participatory approach that we gathered from the data from workshop and analyzed with the causal loop mapping, we find that it enabled stakeholders to understand and also visualize the complexity of the energy system resilience. It helped them to understand and identify the key factors related to it, and also how those factors influence each other under the complex situation. We received a very positive feedback from the participants during the workshop, which helped them to share to form a shared understanding of the energy resilience issues in Nepal. And this is particularly important to design the solution-driven whole system interventions to help Nepal achieve better energy resilience, so that the stakeholders could understand all the factors from different aspects, from technology to policy to finance to social perspective. And then they can see the urgent need of a more coordinated approach to find a solution for energy resilience. So this case study in Nepal could also be applied to other different contexts for different level of communities, like urban community or rural community, and also under different situations, whether it's post-earthquake energy resilience, or nowadays it's more about post-COVID pandemic resilience in relation to energy. So far we presented our findings from the workshop, and apart from the workshop that we focused on energy resilience, we also carried out separate piece of work which more focused on energy governance in relation to the resilient situation in Nepal. So we have a new member joined our team, as Katie has introduced, which is Asher. So Asher will lead us more to talk about our current work with focus on the energy governance, which we carried out some interviews and also some document analysis as well. So I'll pass on to Asher.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jingfang. And just building on the work which was just presented by my colleagues here, we are further exploring the energy resilience in the context of currently undergoing decentralization process of governance in Nepal. So where there are multiple sectors and multi-level governance structures are interacting. So as our presenters already mentioned, we're not limiting our understanding of resilience of energy system to the physical components and looking beyond that. So this is also our attempt to understand more of the social and organizational aspects of the energy resilience. So I'll just briefly introduce you our current research. So we're further looking into exploring who are the energy stakeholders in Nepal, what are their roles and responsibilities, what are the interlinkages between these organizations, what kind of partnering activities are happening. So to answer this, we have started our work with energy stakeholders mapping, so which will allow us to do a detailed stakeholder analysis and find gaps in the energy resilience activities. So in addition to that, we're also looking at the policy, doing the policy mapping of multiple sectors, which cross-cuts with the energy sector, so we can understand the gaps in the strategies and policies. So this slide here is just an example to show you the energy stakeholders mapping that we have done using Quadruple Helix model. So which is to, just to show you an example, but not necessarily, it's not an exhaustive list of the energy stakeholders in Nepal, but it just gives you an idea. So the approach of the Quadruple Helix model has allowed us to bring all the 4 subsystems of the society to describe the context of their participation and coordination, the relationships of the 4 subsystems at the institutional level. So you can see what it's shown here. The green are the government actors, business and industries are in blue. Similarly, academic and research are in red, and the civil societies are presented in yellow. And we also have the 5th category, which I have categorized as in the purple box as our international donors, development partners, international inventors, international investors, like innovation companies and banks, so which also play a very important role in Nepal's energy systems. So understanding the working relationships and interaction between all these subsystems will allow us to understand energy governance process better. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm just trying to give you an example of the current 3 tiers of governance structure in Nepal under the new federal system, which is established in 2017. So we have currently in Nepal, there are more than 750 local government bodies at the local level, and like 7 at the provincial level, and we have like more than 21 different ministries. So you can imagine there is a lot of government structures being established under this new decentralization process. So to help with the coordination between these 3-tier governance, there are 77 district coordination committees in the 77 districts. So the idea is that we have started with identifying energy actors within these different governance structures. So the energy stakeholder mapping exercise we have done so far has allowed us to see who are the actors and the institutions. So the main aim is to understand the governance challenges and opportunities in this new decentralized energy systems and identify the gaps, so which will ultimately allow us to support the energy resilience research. Yeah, so the work is ongoing, and we will definitely share our results once we arrive there. So for today, I'd like to conclude our formal presentation here, and thank you, CRES, and all our participants for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fantastic presentation, and a perfect one, I think, for our first ever webinar that really highlights the systems thinking that we're after. I think Louise explained it really well about why systems thinking is so important, that if we don't take that systems approach, then we're just going to repeat what we're already doing, or we're going to miss a trick, or we're going to just, yeah, we're going to miss something. So I think that was, yeah, really, really interesting, really great research. So I think there's been some questions. I haven't been able to look while I'm sharing, so just bear with me while I flick around screens. Okay, so let me have a look. Right, so we have a question from Denny. How do you create and validate the links? I think it's the links between the different sectors, the different areas that the stakeholders identified.
Yeah, I think that was part of my presentation. So basically, we kept all the links that identified by the participants. So we didn't use our own perspective to validate them, to choose which links to include or not, because we want to include all the links that's identified by participants, which reflect their point of view and their point of understanding of the issue.
Yeah, and that was going to link to a question I had, because you had, I think, 18 different stakeholders that you mentioned. But how do you make sure that their bias, how do you get rid of their bias? Because I'm sure that some stakeholders are going to be really interested in a particular thing, and so different areas are going to have different biases. So how do you take that into account?
I think that's a really interesting question, Katie, about bias. I mean, I think that's personally a real strength of qualitative research, is actually, it's not bias, it's their perception. And these are people that are actually working in and reproducing the governance system and the approaches that are taken towards tackling energy resilience. So I think there's one thing about making sure that when you're doing sort of participatory or deliberative research like this, that everyone's voice is heard. But I think second to that, there's the point about us as facilitators, making sure we do that role of translation and maybe, you know, asking these questions about, well, what about this side of the coin, or what about this aspect that, you know, and sort of as a prompter. But to me, I think I'm not as worried about this idea of bias, because to me, that's quite interesting to understand actually these stakeholders that are involved in this system are really focused on, be that infrastructure or be it on a particular mechanism. And then that to me highlights where there might be particular focus in the system and where we might need to expand out as well. If that does that make sense? Is that, or is that a bit of a politician's answer to your question?
No, it does make sense, and it is kind of what I was thinking, because these people do focus on what they're working on at that time, but then I think it also highlights the importance of having that systems approach, because if everyone's all focused on one area, by making sure we take into account all areas, we're not risking missing something over in the corner that no one's thought about. So yeah, it did answer that. Sorry, I hijacked Denny's question. Oh, right. So how do you prioritize the importance of each of the links?
So the importance of the link, well, each link is the same. They are equally important. What we find is the importance of the factors. So as I showed in the table, some of the factors has more links related to them, which means that they have more links to other factors under the energy resilience mapping. Does it make sense?
Yeah, so again, I think this speaks to our kind of use of the causal loop, almost not as, so part of it is about the end in itself and seeing this, but primarily it's about that process, like the deliberation itself. So it's more about identifying factors rather than taking it to that next step, which is done in a lot of causal loop systems thinking, to kind of then do a far more rigorous, for want of a better word, kind of formalization of actually, you know, where are the best levers to pull, if you see what I mean. This is more a kind of explanatory stage of thinking about what is involved in that process.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Louise. So the next question from Coxu, very interesting presentation. May I know, how did you decide on the starting node, key variables and factors? Did you first prioritize based on the importance in each category? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah,
Everyone's
so
been very quiet.
We took a more inductive approach where we, as Louise explained in her section, actually we started with literally a blank table, a blank slate at the beginning of the workshop with all of the participants, and ask them to contribute different factors. During that process, we may have also merged factors together, and you saw some stacking in the in that first photograph that Louise showed. So we didn't come up with the categories before the workshop. The 4 categories that Xinfang showed were our observation at looking at the different factors after the workshop and in consideration of the literature as well. So it's much more inductive.
Yeah, I think it's great. So those are ideas directly out of those people's heads. So right, next question. Did you also consider that the response to a disaster event is sustainable?
I'd like to answer this one as well. That's okay. I think this links really well to another initiative that I'm involved in. It's called Quantifying Sustainability in the Aftermath of Natural Disasters, QSAND. And that does look at exactly that, at after disasters, and there are certain interventions that are designed, but how do you do it in a sustainable way that actually contributes to the long-term development in that community? So it's trying to bridge that humanitarian aid and development divide. So you might want to look into that.
Brilliant. So keep an eye on Longseng's profile to make sure that we're up to date with what you're up to. So another question, really interesting research, next steps, formulate better interventions, identify priority areas. There's lots of different question marks here. So what are your next steps? So we had a little bit of an introduction from Asha about what you're doing next, but what's the next big project then that you're going to apply this to?
I think we are very grateful for all the ideas that has been proposed there. They are good ideas for us to think about more next steps as well. But originally we did think about doing comparative study where we want to apply the same approach in a rural area as well in Nepal, other low-income countries, because this participatory causal loop mapping is participant dependent and context dependent. So we want to apply it to a different group of stakeholders under different contexts to see how their understanding of the energy resilience would be similar or different. But unfortunately, we were not able to visit the communities physically due to the COVID lockdown, but that was one of the idea for our next step. And the other one is what Asha is doing with the focus on governance across different levels and sectors as well. But now we got lots more ideas here, which is great.
Brilliant, yeah. And to be honest, I want to work with you now. So I'll be messaging you. My colleague Miriam is on this call, and I'm sure that she's thinking it would be nice if we could do this for Africa. So yeah, I will be in contact about working with you. I'm sure that there's lots of other people that would like to work with you now after that fantastic introduction to your work. Paula, instead of bias, will this be considered more like a reflection of current trends? So do you think that the work that you've done now might be very different to the work that you do, how that looks in the maybe 10, 20 years? So lots of nods.
I would say, yeah, I would say absolutely, because it links back to what Xinfang was saying about this being very context dependent, which is also, which is geographically and spatially defined, but is also, time dependent as well, and captures a moment and what people are thinking about, and links to agendas, which is something we've thought about, thinking about smart tariffs and kind of ideas that are in the zeitgeist, if you like. So that will change dependent on thinking at the time, but also learning and development and change. So yeah, definitely, I think it does capture a moment in time, but I think that is also interesting as well. So maybe it's comparative, and then maybe we need to do it again in 10 years as well.
yeah, it seems like it. Miriam, I was just talking about Miriam. The bias actually informs the results, I would say, as it indicates preferences, interests. The challenge is to identify the bias as a researcher. So that's just commenting. Luciano, another Aston person. very interesting presentation. Oh no, he's gone. So, but Luciano does a lot around circular economy in the business school at Aston, so I'm sure he'll be in touch. A message, how can we get involved? Carried solar panels to a remote health post near Kathmandu many years ago and appreciate the nature of energy system fragility. So another person that wants to work with you guys. Denny, who's over in Malaysia, it would be great if we can apply scenario analysis to analyse the resilience of the energy system. I believe more detailed analysis based on the historical incidents can be applied. More quantitative analysis can be applied to the network. So yeah, I think there's some exciting stuff to be doing there, like linking it all together in that systems way. So bringing together what you do with the engineers and all of that stuff. I think, yeah, really exciting.
I think there are some quantitative ways that we might have some resilience indicators as well. So I very much agree.
Yeah, we can link it into environmental stuff and all sorts of different things. So a question from Sonia, what were the biggest challenges in carrying out your research? Was it getting the people in the room? Was it getting them to be open about their ideas? Was it collecting it all in and trying to categorize it?
I think for me, the most fun part was actually in developing and furthering the methodology. I'd never really seen anything like that. And also the participants as well, they are experts, you know, in this space in Nepal. And I saw that they felt really excited by the new knowledge that they had collectively developed. So, you know, they of course already know each other, have had conversations about various aspects. But it was really exciting for me to see that we had something new to offer back to them immediately, rather than, you know, the published paper a bit later.
Yeah, I don't think. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that also this is where we say a really big thank you to the partners in Nepal who were really generous with their time and also providing us access to people. So linking to Asha's point about the governance bit, where we've looked and did interviews, that wouldn't have happened without the partnership and the generosity of the people we worked with in Nepal. And I think that's a big barrier with any research, but I think particularly when you're working internationally, it's having those relationships and great people that you can work with as well.
Yeah, I think the only way to do successful research is by having an amazing group of people and being able to talk like that. The best research always comes out of the fact when you can have these open conversations and work with people that you really like and that you really get on with. So yeah, really great stuff. So I think we're out of questions, loads and loads of questions. I want to say a huge thank you to our speakers today. So you've set the standard really high for our webinars now. This was our first ever one and you guys were fantastic. So a huge thank you to you all, a huge thank you to our audience for coming along today and joining us. And a huge thank you to my colleagues at CRES. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled. We'll be back in touch soon with the next round of webinars. And yeah, keep in touch if you'd like to know more about the research or get involved with what we're up to. So have a great day, everyone. I'm off to get a cup of tea and I'll hopefully see you all in person soon.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're very welcome.
Everyone.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.